Hello, glad for tuning in. So tonight it's going to be the opening night of the first reading. We're going to be reading Terry Pratchett's Equal Rites. There you go. I'm excited to do this for you. Thank you for coming in. And all I'm going to say is that most of these main voices are going to be female, so let's see how that goes. And let's begin. Welcome to the reader. This is a story about magic and where it goes, and perhaps more importantly, where it comes from and why, although it doesn't pretend to answer any or all of these questions. It may, however, help to explain why Gandalf never got married, and why Merlin was a man. Because this is also a story about sex, although probably not in the athletic, tumbling, count the legs and divide by two sense, unless the characters get totally beyond the author's control. They might. However, it is primarily a story about a world. Here it comes now. Watch closely. The special effects are quite expensive. A bass note sounds. It's a deep, vibrating chord that hints at the brass section may break at any moment into a fanfare for the cosmos, because the scene is the blackness of deep space, with a few stars glittering like the dandruff on the shoulders of God. Then it comes into view overhead, bigger than the biggest, most unpleasantly armed star cruiser in the imagination of a three-ring filmmaker. A turtle, 10,000 miles long. It is Great Atuin, one of the rare astrocologians from a universe where things are less as they are and more like people imagine them to be. And it carries on in its meteor-pocked shell 4 giant elephants who bear on their enormous shoulders the great round wheel of the Discworld. As the viewpoint swings around, the whole of the world can be seen by the light of its tiny orbiting sun. There are continents, archipelagos, seas, deserts, mountain ranges, and even a tiny central ice cap. The inhabitants of this place, it is obvious, won't have any truck with global theories. Their world, bounded by an encircling ocean that falls forever into space in one long waterfall, is as round and as flat as geological pizza, although without the anchovies. A world like that, which exists only because the gods enjoy a joke, must be a place where magic can survive. And sex too, of course. He came walking through the thunderstorm, and you could tell he was a wizard, partly because of the long cloak and carven staff, but mainly because the raindrops were stopping several feet from his head and steaming. It was good thunderstorm country up here in the Ram-Top Mountains, a country of jagged peaks, dense forests, and little river valleys, so deep that daylight had no sooner reached the bottom than it was time to leave again. Ragged wisps of cloud clung to the lesser peaks below the mountain trail, along which the wizard slithered and slid. A few slot-eyed goats watched him with mild interest. It doesn't take a lot to interest goats. Sometimes he would stop, throw his heavy staff into the air. It always came down pointing the same way, and the wizard would sigh, pick it up, and continue his squelchy progress. The storm walked around the hills on the legs of lightning, shouting and grumbling. The wizard disappeared around the bend in the track, and the goats went back to their damp grazing, until something else caused them to look up. They stiffened, their eyes widening, their nostrils flaring. This was strange, because there was nothing on the path, but the goats still watched it pass until it was out of sight. There was a village tucked in a narrow valley between steep woods. It wasn't a large village. It wouldn't have shown up on a map of the mountains. It barely showed up on a map of the village. In fact, it was one of those places that exists merely so that people can have a come from. The universe is littered with these hidden villages, windswept little towns under wide skies, isolated cabins on chilly mountains, whose only mark on history is to be the incredibly ordinary place where something extraordinary started to happen. Often there is no more than a little plaque to reveal that against all genealogical probability, someone very famous was born halfway up a wall. Mist curled between the houses as the wizard crossed the narrow bridge over the swollen stream and made his way to the village smithy, although the two facts had nothing to do with one another. The mist would have curled anyway. It was experienced mist, and it got curling down to a fine art. The smithy was fairly crowded, of course. The smithy is one place where you can depend on finding a good fire and someone to talk to. Several villagers were lounging in the warm shadows, but, as the wizard approached, they sat up expectantly and tried to look intelligent, generally with indifferent success. The smith didn't feel the need to be quite so subservient. He nodded at the wizard. It was a greeting between equals, or at least between equals so far as the smith was concerned. After all, any halfway competent blacksmith has more than nodding acquaintance with magic, or at least I could think he has. The wizard bowed. A white cat had been sleeping by the furnace woke up and watched him carefully. "What is the name of this place, sir?" said the wizard. The blacksmith shrugged. "Bad ass," he said. "Bad ass," repeated the blacksmith, his tone defying one to make something of it. The wizard considered this. "A name with a story behind it," he said at last, "which, were circumstances otherwise, I'd be pleased to hear. But I'd like to speak to you, Smith, about your son." "Which one?" said the smith, and the hangers-on sniggered. The wizard smiled. "You have 7 sons, do you not? And you yourself was an 8th son?" The smith's face stiffened. He turned to the other villagers. "All right, rain's stopping. Get off, the lot of you. Me and—" He looked at the wizard with raised eyebrows. "Drum Billet," the wizard said. "Me and Mr. Billet have things to talk about." He waved his hammer vaguely, and one after another, craning over their shoulders in case there was anything interesting, the audience departed. The smith drew a couple of stools from under a bench. He took a bottle out of a cupboard by the water tank and poured a couple of very small glasses of clear liquid. The 2 men sat and watched the rain and the mist roll over the bridge. And the smith said, "I know which son you mean. Old Granny's up with my wife now. 8th son of an 8th son, of course. It did cross my mind, but I never gave much thought, to be honest. Well, well, a wizard in the family, eh?" "You catch on very quickly," said Billet. The white cat jumped from its perch, sauntered across the floor, and vaulted into the wizard's lap, where it curled up. His thin fingers stroked it absent-mindedly. "Well, well," said the smith again. "A wizard and bad-ass, eh?" Possibly, said Billet. "Of course he'll have to get to the university first. He may do very well, of course." The smith considered the idea from all angles. Decided he liked it a lot. A thought struck him. "Hang on," he said. "I'm trying to remember what my father told me. A wizard who knows he's going to die can sort of pass on his wizardness to another in a successor, right?" "I have never heard it so succinctly put, but yes," said the wizard. "So you're going to sort of die?" "Oh, yes." The cat purred as the fingers tickled it behind the ear. The smith looked embarrassed. "Well, when?" The wizard thought for a moment. "In about 6 minutes' time." "Oh, don't worry," said the wizard. "I'm quite looking forward to it, to tell you the truth. I hear it's quite painless." The blacksmith considered this. "Who told you?" The wizard pretended not to hear him. He was watching the bridge, looking for telltale turbulence in the mist. "Look," said the smith, "you better tell me how we go about bringing up a wizard, you see, because there isn't a wizard in these parts, and—" "It'll all sort stuff out," said Billet pleasantly. "The magic has guided me to you, and the magic will take care of everything. It usually does." "Do I hear a cry?" The blacksmith looked at the ceiling. Above the splash of rain, he could make out the sound of a pair of new lungs at full bore. The wizard smiled. "Have him brought down here." The cat sat up and looked interestedly at the forge's wide doorway. As the smith called excitedly up the stairs, it jumped down and padded slowly across the floor, purring like a bandsaw. A white-haired woman appeared at the bottom of the stairs, clutching a bundle in a basket. The smith hurried her over to where the wizard sat. "But," she began. "This is very important," said the smith importantly. "What do we do now, sir?" The wizard held up the staff. It was man-high and near as thick as his wrist, covered with carvings that seemed to change. The smith looked at them. exactly as if they didn't want them to see what they were. "The child must hold it," said Drum Billet. The smith nodded and fumbled in his blanket until he found a tiny pink hand. He guided it gently to the wood. He gripped it tightly. "But," said the midwife, "it's all right, Granny. I know what I'm about. She's a witch, sir. Don't mind her." "Right," said the smith. "Now what?" The wizard was silent. "What do we do now?" The smith began, and stopped. Leaned down to look at the old wizard's face. Bill was smiling, but it was anyone's guess as to what the joke was. The smith pushed the baby back into the arms of the frantic midwife. Then, as respectfully as possible, he unpried the thin, pale fingers from the staff. It had a strange, greasy feel, like static electricity. The wood itself was almost black, but the carvings were slightly lighter, and it hurt the eyes if you tried to make it precisely what they were supposed to be. "Are you pleased with yourself?" said the midwife. "Huh? Oh, yes. Yes, as a matter of fact, yes." "Why?" She twitched aside a fold of the blanket. The smith looked down and swallowed. "No," he whispered. He said, "And what would he know about it?" sneered Granny. "But he said it would be a son. It doesn't look like a son to me, laddie." The smith flopped down on the stool, his head in his hands. "What have I done?" he moaned. "You've given the world its first female wizard," said the midwife. "Who's it too witsy then?" "What?" "I was talking to the baby." The white cat purred and arched its back as if it was rubbing against the legs of an old friend, which was odd, because there was no one there. "I was foolish," said a voice in tones no mortal could hear. "I assumed the magic would know what it's doing." "Perhaps it does. If only I could do something." "There is no going back. There is no going back," said the deep, heavy voice, like the closing of crypt doors. The wisp of nothing that was Drum Billet thought for a while. "But she's going to have a lot of problems." "That's what life is all about, so I'm told. I wouldn't know, of course." "What about reincarnation?" Death hesitated. "You wouldn't like it," he said. "Take it from me. You've got to be trained for it. You've got to start off small and work your way up. You've no idea how horrible it is to be an ant. It's bad. You wouldn't believe it. And with your karma, an ant is too much to expect." The baby had been taken back to his mother, and the smith sat disconsolately, watching the rain. Drum Billet scratched the cat behind its ears and thought about his life. It had been a long one. That was one of the advantages of being a wizard. He'd done a lot of things that he hadn't always felt good about. It was about time that... "I haven't got all day, you know," said Death, reproachfully. The wizard looked down at the cat and realized for the first time how odd it looked now. The living don't often appreciate how complicated the world looks when you are dead, because while death frees the mind from the straitjacket of 3 dimensions, it also cuts away from time, which is only another dimension. So while the cat rubbed up against the invisible legs that was undoubtedly the same cat he had seen a few minutes before, it was also quite clearly a tiny kitten and a fat, half-blind old moggy and every stage in between. All at once. Since it had started off so small, it looked like a white cat-shaped carrot, a description that would have to do until people properly invent a 4-dimensional adjective. Death's skeletal hand tapped Billet gently on the shoulder. "Come away, my son. There's nothing I can do. Life is for the living. Anyway, you've given her your staff." "Yes, there is that." There will be more, and we need to discuss some stuff about the books. But thank you for tuning in for the very first start and work on the voices. Anyway, everyone, good night, and I love you. We're going to enjoy this.